The heavy iron doors of the county jail slammed shut with a deafening metallic screech. High-voltage fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly green glare across the polished concrete floor. Two armed deputies pinned Ethan Mercer against the cold cinderblock wall. The sharp click of steel handcuffs echoed through the intake room. Outside the glass partition, 7-year-old Lily let out a high-pitched, terrifying shriek, her tiny chest heaving as she fought for oxygen. Clara Mercer pressed her trembling hands against the cold glass, her knuckles turning white, watching her life shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces in less than 5 seconds. To understand how a quiet family ended up in this living nightmare, we have to turn back the clock to where the darkness first began. 3 hours earlier, the world was deceptively quiet. Rain lashed relentlessly against the foggy window panes of the Mercers' modest suburban home in suburban Philadelphia. Inside, the air smelled of stale, dark, roast coffee and damp wool. Clara sat at the cluttered oak dining table, her eyes burning under the dim yellow light of a single desk lamp. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard of her laptop, creating a steady, rhythmic clatter that filled the silent room. Spread out before her was a mountain of paper. Utility bills stamped with past due notices, medical receipts, and complex tax spreadsheets. 7 years ago, Clara was a rising star at a prestigious downtown auditing firm. She had an eagle eye for numbers and a sharp, analytical mind that could spot a single misplaced decimal in $1 million ledger. But when Lily was born with fragile lungs, and Ethan's career at Victory Group demanded endless hours, Clara made a choice. She stepped back. She resigned from her firm and transitioned to low-paying freelance bookkeeping from home. She traded her tailored suits for faded, oversized sweaters, choosing to become the invisible foundation of the household. That sacrifice, however, had slowly turned into a silent trap. Over the years, her silence was mistaken for weakness. Her lurching back to the domestic sphere was treated as laziness. Ethan's mother and relatives openly dismissed her as a financial parasite who simply lived off Ethan's hard-earned paycheck. Inside the house, the silence between Clara and Ethan had grown thick, cold, and suffocating. Ethan worked as a logistics supervisor at the massive central warehouse of Victory Group, a powerhouse real estate and commercial conglomerate. The pressure of being the sole breadwinner weighed heavily on his shoulders. He returned home every night with a hardened jaw and tired, hollow eyes. He barely spoke. He ate his dinner in total silence, staring at his phone, retreating into a shell of cold indifference. It was a subtle, invisible violence, a cold war that eroded Clara's self-worth day after day. She spent countless nights crying quietly in the locked bathroom, drowning in a sea of self-pity, blaming herself for losing her identity, and cursing the cruel turn her life had taken. At 2:15 a.m., the fragile quiet of the night shattered. In the small bedroom down the hall, a wet, rattling gasp broke the silence. Clara bolted upright from her chair, her coffee mug spilling across a stack of bank statements. She raced into Lily's room. The little girl was clutching her throat, her lips turning a faint, terrifying shade of blue. Her chest caved in, with every desperate attempt to draw air. Ethan rushed in a second later, his face pale with sudden terror. Without exchanging a single word, he scooped Lily's tiny, burning body into his arms. They tore through the pouring rain, the windshield wipers slapping wildly against the glass as Ethan drove dangerously fast through the empty, slick streets of Philadelphia. They burst through the automatic sliding doors of Children's Mercy Hospital. The air inside smelled sharply of rubbing alcohol, floor bleach, and medical oxygen. Nurses in blue scrubs rushed forward with a gurney. Within minutes, Lily was hooked up to heart monitors and oxygen lines in trauma room 302. The rhythmic, high-pitched beep, beep, beep of the vitals monitor filled the sterile room. Ethan sat on a small plastic chair, right beside the hospital bed. His large, calloused hands completely wrapped around Lily's small, feverish fist. He leaned down close to her ear. To soothe her rising panic, Ethan began to sing. His voice was rough, raspy, and trembling, but he held the tune with fierce devotion. It was an old, soft lullaby, the only song he knew by heart, one he had sung to her since she was an infant. Clara stood near the doorway, watching them through a haze of exhaustion. She saw the raw, desperate love in her husband's eyes, a rare glimpse of the man she had once married before stress and silence had buried him deep inside. Lily's breathing gradually stabilized. The machine's rhythm slowed to a safe, steady pattern. At 6 a.m., as the first pale gray light of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, Lily fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Ethan gently kissed his daughter's forehead, whispered a soft promise to be right back, and stepped out into the hospital corridor to grab 2 cups of black coffee from the lobby machine. He never made it to the lobby. The heavy glass entrance doors of the hospital burst open with a loud bang. Heavy tactical boots thudded loudly against the polished floor. Sheriff Donald Vance, wearing a dark trench coat alongside 2 armed county deputies, marched straight down the hallway. Before Ethan could even ask what was happening, Deputy Miller grabbed his arm, twisted it violently behind his back, and slammed his chest against the hard plaster wall. "Ethan Mercer, you are under arrest," Sheriff Vance declared, his voice booming through the quiet hospital wing. "You have the right to remain silent." Clara rushed out of room 302, her heart dropping into her stomach. "What are you doing? What is this about?" she screamed, her voice cracking. Sheriff Vance pulled out a crisp, signed warrant, his eyes cold and devoid of any sympathy. "At 2 a.m. this morning, someone used your husband's security clearance and personal digital key to breach the central server at Victory Group. $2 million were illegally transferred out of the company's primary account. Physical access logs confirm his keycard cleared the server room door." "That's impossible," Clara cried out, her hands shaking violently. "He's been here. He's been in room 302 holding our daughter's hand all night. The doctors saw him. The nurses saw him." "Tell it to the judge, lady," Vance sneered, snapping the steel cuffs tightly onto Ethan's wrists. At that exact moment, Ethan's mother, Evelyn Mercer, stepped off the elevator. Seeing her son in handcuffs, she lost all control. She didn't attack the police. Instead, she turned her burning rage directly on Clara. Evelyn lunged forward and delivered a stinging slap across Clara's cheek. The sharp crack echoed loudly down the corridor. "You leech!" Evelyn shrieked, her face contorted with pure hatred. "This is your fault. You sit at home all day doing nothing while my son suffocates under your bills. You pushed him to this. You ruined his life." Ethan was dragged away, his boots dragging helplessly across the floor, his eyes fixed on Clara in silent terror. Clara stood frozen under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway. Her cheek burned red, but the pain in her face was nothing compared to the icy realization sweeping through her soul. She looked down at the polished floor. Right near her shoes lay Lily's small blue plastic hospital ID band, torn off during the chaos. Clara slowly knelt down. Her knees hit the cold floor. She picked up the small plastic band. The printed barcode was crisp, bearing the exact timestamp of Lily's emergency admission, 2:15 a.m. Clara squeezed the plastic band tight inside her fist until the sharp edges dug deep into her skin. She wiped the single tear from her face. The helpless, sobbing victim who had spent years hiding in the shadows died, right then and there on the hospital floor. A cold, fierce fire ignited in her eyes. She looked up toward the exit where they had dragged her husband away. She was done crying. She was done playing the victim. She was going to tear their lies apart, piece by piece. The heavy, mahogany doors of courtroom Forby swung open with an agonizing creak. The air smelled thick of old paper, polished oak, and floor wax. High on the bench sat Judge Robert Sterling, a dark wool blanket draped over his lower body, discreetly hiding the wheelchair beneath his robe. His eyes were cold and hollow, staring down like an exhausted stone statue. To Sterling, this was just another file in an endless sea of broken lives. Down at the defense table, Ethan Mercer sat in a faded orange jumpsuit, his shoulders slumped forward. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Andrew Cole leaned back in his leather chair. Cole adjusted his silk tie and tapped a silver pen against his pristine desk. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Cole began, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial confidence. "The state's evidence is absolute. At 2 a.m., the defendant's digital key breached the central server room at Victory Group. System logs recorded his user ID. Security cameras caught a man of his height wearing his canvas jacket, leaving the scene. The defendant was overwhelmed by debt. He stole $2 million. Ethan's court-appointed lawyer leaned over and whispered coldly, "Sign the plea deal, Ethan. 10 years. If we fight this, Judge Sterling will give you 20. Take the deal." Ethan shook his head helplessly, his knuckles turning white. "I didn't do it. I was at the hospital. My daughter was suffocating." "Nobody cares about your excuses," the lawyer snapped back. "The digital paper trail says you're guilty." From the gallery, Clara watched the trap closing around her husband. She saw the corrupt prosecutor, the lazy attorney, and the stone-faced judge ready to slam the gavel down. The old Clara, the frightened housewife who cried in the dark, was dead. The auditor inside her took full control. She knew numbers and she knew how systems worked. Clara stood up. The sharp click of her heels snapped through the silent courtroom. "Objection, Your Honor." Prosecutor Cole spun around, brow furrowing in disgust. "Your Honor, control this woman." Clara walked down the aisle, eyes locked on Judge Sterling. "I am Clara Mercer, the defendant's wife. I am a forensic auditor. The prosecution's digital evidence is fatally flawed. I demand 24 hours to present exculpatory physical evidence." Judge Sterling raised a heavy eyebrow. "Give me one valid reason why I shouldn't have my bailiff remove you right now." "Because physical access logs to the server room require a card swipe at the door," Clara stated coldly, her words precise like a scalpel. "My husband was at Children's Mercy holding our daughter's hand at 2:15 a.m. Unless he broke the laws of physics, he could not be in two places at once. Grant me 24 hours to retrieve physical logs, or you are sentencing an innocent man on falsified data." Prosecutor Cole jumped up. "This is preposterous. Pure delay tactics." Judge Sterling stared at Clara. For the first time, a flicker of something human flashed deep within his cold gray eyes. He raised his wooden gavel. 24 hours, Mrs. Mercer. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Bring me ironclad proof, or I will finalize your husband's sentence." The gavel struck the sound block with a sharp crack. The clock was ticking. Clara drove straight to Children's Mercy Hospital. Cold wind bit at her skin. She marched up to the pediatric floor desk. "I need security footage and room access logs for room 302 from last night." The administrator frowned at her screen. "That's strange. Third-floor video files were permanently wiped an hour ago." Clara's blood ran cold. The corruption reached into the hospital. She tracked down Nurse Sarah in a quiet break room smelling of burnt coffee and bleach. Sarah was wringing her hands nervously. "Nurse Sarah, you saw my husband at 2 a.m. Clara pleaded softly. You heard him singing to my daughter." Sarah looked around frantically, eyes wide with terror. "Mrs. Mercer, leave me alone. 2 men in black suits came to my house this morning. They knew where my kids go to school. I can't help you." Sarah bolted out the door. Clara sat on a wooden bench and opened her laptop, accessing Ethan's cloud. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in a blur. There it was. Ethan hadn't stolen money. 2 days ago, Ethan flagged a massive inventory discrepancy in Warehouse 4. Millions in phantom medical supplies were marked as shipped, but physical shelves were empty. Victory Group was using fake logistics invoices to launder illegal money. Ethan had stumbled upon their master ledger. They weren't just convicting him. They were erasing him. At 10 p.m., Clara drove down a dark country road toward home to print the audit sheets. Suddenly, blinding high-beam headlights flared up in her rearview mirror. A heavy black pickup truck accelerated. Bang! The heavy steel bumper slammed into the back of Clara's car. Metal crunched violently. Glass shattered. Clara gasped, her hands gripping the wheel as her sedan fishtailed across wet asphalt. Bang! The truck rammed her again, forcing her car off the road. The sedan spun out of control, tore through a guardrail, and flipped down an embankment. Hot steam hissed from the engine. Leaking gasoline filled the air. Blood trickled down Clara's forehead. Clara coughed, vision swimming. She unbuckled her seatbelt and crashed onto the shattered interior. Through the broken window, she saw her leather briefcase resting in the mud, intact. She crawled through broken glass, her hands getting cut, her clothes soaked in black mud and blood. She dragged the heavy briefcase to her chest. She stood up on shaking legs, wiping blood from her eyes, staring at the burning wreck of her car. A cold, fierce smile spread across her face. "You picked the wrong woman," she whispered into the dark night. She tightened her grip on the briefcase and began walking toward the city lights. At 8:15 a.m., the door to Judge Robert Sterling's private chambers slammed open. Judge Sterling sat behind his massive mahogany desk, adjusting his dark wool blanket over his paralyzed legs. His eyes narrowed as he looked up. Clara Mercer stood in the doorway. Rain and mud spattered her black coat. A bloody bandage covered her left temple. Her face was pale, but her dark eyes burned with an icy intensity. Clutched tightly under her right arm was a mud-stained leather briefcase. Beside her stood 7-year-old Lily, holding her mother's hand, wearing her pale blue hospital gown under an oversized yellow rain jacket. "Mrs. Mercer," Sterling said, his voice deep and stern, "this is highly improper. You cannot barge into my chambers before court is in session. You told me to bring ironclad proof, Your Honor," Clara stated, her voice flat and steady. "I brought it, and someone tried to kill me on Route 9 to stop me from delivering it." Clara marched straight up to his desk. She unzipped the briefcase and laid 3 distinct items onto the polished wood. First, she placed Lily's blue plastic hospital ID band. The black barcode printed on the band was crisp and clear. "This is my daughter's admission tag from Children's Mercy," Clara said, pointing at the numbers. The electronic barcode reader logged her entry at 2:15 a.m. "My husband was holding her hand when the system scanned this tag." The hospital server logs cannot be altered remotely. Second, Clara opened a thick, perfectly bound stack of financial spreadsheets. She laid them out side by side. "This is my forensic audit of Victory Group's Warehouse 4 logistics. Over the last 18 months, $24 million in medical supplies were marked as received and shipped, but physical freight weight records show the shipping trucks left the docks completely empty. Victory Group is using fake inventory logs to launder money through offshore accounts." Finally, Clara placed her smartphone on the desk and tapped the screen. A coarse, raspy voice echoed through the quiet room. "Nurse Sarah, keep your mouth shut about Mercer being at the hospital, or your kids won't make it home from school." Judge Sterling stared at the phone. His face turned pale. His hands trembled slightly against the arms of his leather chair. He knew that voice. It belonged to Sheriff Donald Vance. Sterling picked up the audit sheets. As his eyes scanned the complex flow of offshore account numbers, his heart hammered against his ribs. A specific digital signature at the bottom of the wire transfers caught his breath: Marcus Brand. 5 years ago, Judge Sterling was investigating a suspicious corporate tax fraud case involving Marcus Brand. One rainy night, a heavy truck rammed Sterling's sedan off a mountain ridge. His car plummeted 50 feet into a ravine. He survived, but the severe spinal trauma and psychological shock left his lower body completely paralyzed. The doctors called it functional neurological disorder, a psychological block born from deep trauma that froze his nervous system. Broken and bitter, Sterling had given up. He had spent 5 years hiding behind a wheelchair, accepting his paralysis as an inescapable fate, letting corrupt men rule his courtroom. Now, looking at Clara's forensic audit, he realized the terrifying truth. His accident wasn't bad luck. It was a calculated hit by Marcus Brand to bury the investigation. The exact same tactic used against Clara last night. Lily stepped forward, her small yellow rain boots squeaking against the hardwood floor. She reached out her tiny hand and laid Lily's hospital ID band directly into Sterling's palm. "My daddy held my hand all night," Lily whispered softly, her large eyes shining with tears. "He sang my favorite song, so I wouldn't be scared of the dark. My daddy is good. Please don't let the bad men hurt him." Sterling looked down at the tiny plastic band in his hand. The warm, innocent touch of the child broke through the icy wall he had built around his heart. The shame hit him like a physical blow. He had allowed fear to turn him into a coward. He had let corrupt predators turn his courtroom into a stage for their crimes. A surge of hot adrenaline rushed through Sterling's chest. The fire of justice, buried deep under 5 years of bitterness, ignited into a roaring blaze. "Leave us for 10 minutes, Mrs. Mercer," Sterling commanded, his voice shaking with raw emotion. "Wait in the hallway." As the door clicked shut, Sterling turned his chair toward the small physical therapy bars standing in the corner of his chambers, bars he hadn't touched in 3 years. He gripped the cold steel rails with his large, calloused hands. He gritted his teeth, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth ached. "Get up, you old fool," Sterling growled to himself. "Get up." He pulled with all his upper body strength. A sharp, burning pain shot down his lower spine. His knees wobbled violently. His legs felt like heavy sacks of wet sand. But for the first time in 5 years, a faint sensation, a prickle of hot needles, flashed through his toes. He screamed through closed teeth, his muscles straining, sweat pouring down his forehead, soaking his white shirt. With a brutal surge of willpower, Sterling forced his legs to lock. He stood upright. He swayed for a second, gasping for air, but his feet held his weight. He took one slow, painful step forward, then another. He wasn't helpless. He was a judge of the United States court system, and he was ready to fight. In the hallway, Clara stood beside the window. She pulled a small compact mirror from her purse. She wiped the black mud from her neck and retied her hair into a sleek, tight bun. She smoothed down her dark tailored blazer, squaring her shoulders. She looked at her reflection. The tired, invisible housewife was gone. Standing in her place was an untouchable, dangerous woman who held the truth in her hands. The door to the chambers opened. Sterling stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a solid oak walking cane, his posture straight and formidable. "Mrs. Mercer," Sterling said, his eyes burning with fierce determination. "We are not holding a sentencing hearing today. We are holding a public execution of a criminal empire. Are you ready?" Clara straightened her blazer and picked up her briefcase. "I've been ready my whole life, Your Honor." The heavy brass bell of the courthouse began to toll at 9 a.m. Clara walked down the marble hallway, the sharp, rhythmic click of her high heels echoing like thunder through the corridors. The heavy doors of courtroom 4B swung open, and the gallery hummed with a low, nervous energy. Sunbeams cut through the dusty air, illuminating the polished oak pews and bright brass railings. But today, the room felt different. 3 large black television cameras mounted on heavy steel tripods stood at the back of the courtroom, their red recording lights blinking softly. Cables snaked across the floor like dark serpents. Judge Robert Sterling had exercised his federal judicial authority to convert this proceeding into a mandatory public hearing broadcast live on national television and news streams across the country. At the defense table, Ethan Mercer sat with his hands resting quietly on the wood. Beside him, Clara sat perfectly straight in a crisp, tailored navy blazer. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, immaculate bun. The dark bruises under her eyes were carefully concealed, and her posture exuded an unshakable, calm authority. She was no longer the silent housewife weeping in the dark. She was an expert forensic auditor, ready for war. On the left side of the room sat CEO Marcus Brand, dressed in a $3,000 pinstripe suit, his gold cufflinks catching the sunlight. Beside him sat Sheriff Donald Vance in his sharp dress uniform, his heavy boots resting on the floor. Next to them was Prosecutor Andrew Cole, nervously straightening his silk tie. Marcus Brand leaned back, a smug, contemptuous smile resting on his face. Behind them sat a team of 4 high-priced defense attorneys holding thick leather folders. They believed this broadcast was a minor inconvenience, a desperate publicity stunt by a broke family. They were confident their legal influence would crush Clara in minutes. In the second row of the gallery sat Evelyn Mercer, Ethan's mother, alongside several family relatives. Evelyn kept her arms crossed tightly over her chest, glaring at Clara's back with bitter resentment. She still believed Ethan was a criminal who had been ruined by Clara's demands. The courtroom grew dead silent as the side door opened. The heavy thud of a wooden walking cane echoed through the room. Thump, step, thump, step. Judge Robert Sterling walked into the room under his own power. He did not use a wheelchair. He wore his black judicial robe, his face carved out of hard granite, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying intensity. He leaned heavily on a solid oak cane, but his posture was tall, formidable, and commanding. The entire gallery gasped. Marcus Brand's smug smile instantly froze. Sheriff Donald Vance shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw dropping in disbelief. Judge Sterling mounted the bench, sat down, and raised his heavy wooden gavel. Crack! This court is now in session. Judge Sterling's deep voice boomed through the speakers, echoing in every corner of the room and through millions of television screens across the nation. We are here for a public evidentiary hearing regarding state fraud, systemic corruption, and the unlawful detention of Ethan Mercer. Prosecutor Andrew Cole stood up immediately, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. Your Honor, I must object to this circus. The media presence violates protocol. The defendant's wife has no standing to present evidence in this court. Objection overruled, Mr. Cole. Sterling replied coldly, not even looking at him. Mrs. Clara Mercer is a certified forensic auditor. She will present her findings as a court-appointed expert witness. Mrs. Mercer, take the stand. Clara stood up. The sharp, rhythmic click of her high heels echoed off the marble floor as she walked up to the witness stand. She adjusted the microphone, opened her leather briefcase, and pulled out a clean digital drive. She plugged it into the courtroom projector system. A massive white screen dropped down behind the judicial bench. Bright blue light illuminated the dark room as complex financial spreadsheets, bank wire records, and logistics logs appeared in sharp, high-definition detail. Members of the court and citizens watching across the country, Clara began. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady, cutting through the silence like a freshly sharpened blade. My name is Clara Mercer. For 7 years, I was told I was just a housewife. But before that, I was a senior forensic auditor. Today, I am here to present the mathematical truth. And numbers do not lie. She tapped a button on the podium console. The screen zoomed in on a series of encrypted bank transactions. On October 12th, at 2 a.m., $2 million were transferred out of Victory Group's primary account, Clara explained, her finger pointing at the glowing numbers. The prosecution claims my husband, Ethan Mercer, executed this transfer using his digital keycard in the central server room. However, digital forensic analysis shows the transfer did not originate from the server room at all. The command was executed via a remote encrypted connection originating from a private terminal inside the executive suite of CEO Marcus Brand. The gallery erupted into quiet murmurs. Marcus Brand's face turned bright red. He leaned over and barked an angry order to his chief attorney. Nonsense, Marcus Brand's lead attorney shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. This is wild speculation from an unverified source. Where is the physical proof? Here is your physical proof, Clara responded instantly without blinking. She tapped the console again. A high-resolution image of a shipping manifest from Victory Group's Warehouse 4 appeared on the screen, side by side with official state highway way station logs. Over the last 18 months, Warehouse 4 logged $24 million in shipped pharmaceutical supplies, Clara stated, her voice growing stronger and more resonant. My husband, Ethan, managed that warehouse. 2 days ago, he noticed that while the manifest books claimed tons of supplies were moving out on freight trucks, the physical shelves in Warehouse 4 were completely empty. I cross-referenced Victory Group's shipping manifests with the Department of Transportation's highway scale records. The freight trucks leaving Warehouse 4 weighed exactly the same empty as they did when they arrived. Victory Group was shipping air. Clara turned her eyes directly toward Marcus Brand. They created 15 shell companies across Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Clara continued, her words landing like heavy hammer blows. They used phantom medical inventory to generate fake invoices, laundering illicit funds for corrupt public officials. When Ethan discovered the empty shelves and flagged the discrepancy in the system logs, he became a threat. They didn't just want to fire him. They used his stolen user ID to frame him for theft, ensuring he would spend 15 years in prison where no one would listen to his warnings. In the second row of the gallery, Evelyn Mercer covered her mouth with her trembling hands. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Clara. The realization hit her like a physical strike. Her daughter-in-law was not a weak parasite. Clara was a warrior, standing alone against a billion-dollar empire to save her son. Marcus Brand stood up violently, his face contorted with rage. This is absurd. This woman is making wild accusations without corroborating witnesses. You cannot convict a major corporation on spreadsheet fairy tales. She doesn't need to, Mr. Brand, Judge Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave into a terrifying, icy calm. At that exact moment, the courtroom projector screen flickered. A new file popped up automatically on the screen, overriding the presentation. A digital countdown timer hit 0. An automated, encrypted email dispatch from an external server broke through the court network. A video window expanded across the giant screen. The face of prosecutor Andrew Cole appeared on the screen, recorded in a dimly lit, shadowy room. His eyes in the video were bloodshot, his skin pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he spoke into the camera. "If you are watching this video," Cole's recorded voice echoed through the courtroom speakers, trembling with raw horror, "it means I am already dead. Marcus Brand and Sheriff Donald Vance found out I was trying to leave the country. They forced me at gunpoint to sign a false confession, but I set this automated broadcast to release if I missed my daily check-in." The entire gallery gasped. Prosecutor Andrew Cole, sitting at the prosecution table in real life, turned as white as a sheet. He slumped back into his chair, his eyes wide with sheer terror. For the past 5 years, Cole's recorded video continued, his voice crying out from the speakers. Victory Group has operated a systematic framing ring. Whenever an employee, an auditor, or a journalist discovered their laundering network, Sheriff Vance planted evidence, wiped security footage, and I manipulated the grand jury to secure convictions. We framed 15 innocent people. We destroyed 15 families. Marcus Brand ordered the hit on Judge Sterling's car 5 years ago. He ordered the hit on Clara Mercer last night. God forgive me for what I've done. The recording was cut to black. Total, stunned silence swallowed the courtroom. The air was thick with shock. Sheriff Donald Vance suddenly reached for his sidearm, his knuckles turning white as he prepared to bolt toward the side exit. Crack! Judge Sterling slammed his wooden gavel down with the force of a thunderclap. The sound reverberated off the marble walls like a gunshot. "Bailiffs, secure the doors," Sterling commanded, his voice roaring like a storm. The heavy brass doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 6 armed federal agents in dark blue vests bearing gold FBI lettering marched into the room, their boots stomping rhythmically against the floor. Judge Sterling slowly stood up behind the bench. He pushed his chair back, standing tall on his own 2 feet, leaning firmly on his cane. He looked down at the defense table with absolute, unyielding authority. "Maurice Brand, Donald Vance, and Andrew Cole," Sterling declared, his voice ringing out to the millions watching the live broadcast. "You are hereby charged under the RICO Act with racketeering, wire fraud, procedural obstruction, attempted murder, and the systematic framing of innocent citizens of the United States." The FBI agents surrounded the executive table. Before Marcus Brand could speak a single word, an agent slammed him against the mahogany table, twisting his arms behind his back and snapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Another pair of agents pinned Sheriff Vance against the railing, stripping him of his badge and gun, clicking the cuffs tight around his wrists. The cameras zoomed in on Marcus Brand's face as he was dragged toward the exit, his expensive suit rumpled, his dignity shattered forever on national television. Judge Sterling turned his gaze toward Ethan Mercer. The judge's expression softened, a deep, profound respect shining in his eyes. "Ethan Mercer," Sterling spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing with deep emotion. "This court formally dismisses all charges against you with prejudice. You are a free man. Furthermore, this court orders an immediate federal audit and full financial restitution for all 15 victims whose lives were stolen by this criminal enterprise. The state owes you and your family a profound apology." Sterling raised his gavel one last time and brought it down. Crack. Case closed. The courtroom erupted into cheers and applause. Ethan stood up, his body trembling, tears streaming freely down his face. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at Clara. Clara stepped down from the witness stand. Ethan rushed toward her and pulled her into his arms with all the strength he had left. He buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Clara." Ethan wept, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I ever doubted you. I'm sorry I let you become invisible. You saved my life. You saved us all." Clara held her husband tightly, feeling the warmth of his breath, the beating of his heart. But as she stood in his embrace, she felt a profound shift deep inside her soul. She was no longer looking for his validation. She was no longer seeking approval from his family or the world. She had reclaimed her own mind, her own power, her own destiny. In the gallery, Evelyn Mercer walked up slowly, her head bowed in deep shame. Tears ran down her wrinkled cheeks. "Clara," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with remorse. I was wrong about you. Can you ever forgive me?" Clara looked at her mother-in-law. There was no anger in Clara's eyes, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. She simply held herself high, her posture graceful and untouchable. "I don't hold resentment, Evelyn," Clara said softly, her voice calm and firm. "Because from today on, my family's life is defined by truth, not by fear." Clara took Ethan's hand, gathered her briefcase, and picked up Lily in her arms. Together, they walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, passing the cameras, passing the cheering crowd, walking out into the bright, clean light of day. 6 months later, a warm, golden autumn light washed over Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. Crisp red and orange maple leaves drifted slowly through the air, resting gently on the emerald grass. The air smelled clean and sharp, rich with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and fresh pine needles. Standing near an ancient oak tree, Clara Mercer closed her eyes and took a deep, quiet breath. The suffocating weight that had rested on her chest for 7 long years was completely gone. In the months following the trial, the justice system had worked with relentless speed. Victory Group's illegal assets were frozen, and a court-mandated federal fund provided full financial restitution to Ethan and the 14 other framed victims. The corrupt network was dismantled, but Clara did not wait for the world to hand her a future. She took total responsibility for her own destiny. Clara moved out of the shadow of her past. She rented a bright, modern office space in downtown Philadelphia and established Mercer and Associates, an independent forensic accounting firm. She dedicated her expertise to protecting small businesses and vulnerable individuals from corporate fraud. She updated her professional certifications, rebuilt her physical strength through daily morning runs, and curated a wardrobe of sharp, elegant tailored suits. She was no longer hiding behind faded, oversized sweaters or drowning in self-pity. She was the sole architect of her own life. The door to her mind was closed to past resentments. When Evelyn Mercer visited her new office to offer a quiet, humbled apology, Clara listened politely. She accepted the peace, but she did not dwell on the years of insults. She felt no bitterness toward her mother-in-law, nor toward the system that had almost broken her family. Oaths of vengeance and endless anger were heavy chains, and Clara had chosen absolute freedom. Down the paved walking path, 2 figures approached under the canopy of golden leaves. Judge Robert Sterling walked beside Lily, holding his carved wooden walking cane in his right hand. He wore a crisp navy wool coat, his posture tall and imposing. His legs moved with a steady, rhythmic stride, a daily testament to his victory over the psychological trauma that had once paralyzed him. He had returned to the federal bench with renewed purpose, becoming a beacon of integrity across the state. Lily skipped happily beside him, her bright yellow jacket contrasting against the red foliage. Her lungs were completely healed, her laughter echoing clear and sweet through the quiet park like silver bells. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Sterling called out, stopping near the bench. A warm, genuine smile softened his granite features. "Judge Sterling," Clara replied, stepping forward to greet him. "You are walking remarkably well today." "Movement is a choice, Clara," Sterling said softly, resting his hand on his cane. just as justice is a choice. We choose to stand, or we choose to stay down. I am grateful you reminded me how to stand. Ethan walked up from the nearby coffee kiosk, carrying 2 warm paper cups. He wore a simple, well-fitted dark jacket. His face was relaxed, the deep lines of stress and cold indifference completely smoothed away. In the weeks after his release, Ethan had undergone his own transformation. He resigned from warehouse logistics and enrolled in evening courses for supply chain ethics, taking full responsibility for his past silence and emotional detachment. The toxic dynamic of their marriage was permanently shattered and rebuilt on a new foundation: absolute equality, mutual respect, and open communication. Ethan no longer viewed Clara as a quiet homemaker, but as a formidable partner whose strength he admired every single day. Ethan handed Clara a cup of hot dark roast. His fingers brushed against hers. He looked into her eyes with a quiet, profound devotion. "Thank you, Clara," Ethan whispered, his voice steady and warm. Clara smiled, taking a slow sip of the coffee. The rich, bittersweet taste warmed her throat. "We built this together, Ethan, but we each hold our own ground now." Lily ran up and grabbed both of their hands, pulling them toward the open lawn where the golden afternoon sun streamed through the trees. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a long, brilliant amber glow across the park. The world felt quiet, serene, and vast. Clara stood between her husband and daughter, the golden light illuminating her face. She looked back one last time at the path she had walked, from the dark, cold hospital corridors to the terrifying courtroom, from a silent victim to a woman of unshakable power. There was no anger left in her heart. There was no fear of tomorrow. Clara lifted her chin, taking in the crisp autumn air. She stood tall, free, and proud, bathing in the warmth of her golden hour. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.